All right, you guys, so the time has come because we finally got a 28mm lens for my Leica cameras. All right, you guys, so the time has finally come. This is the day that I have been dreaming about probably for about a year or so now, and we finally got a 28mm lens for my Leica M mount cameras. All right, so here it is, you guys, the 28mm Ultron vintage. Does it say vintage on there? It does say vintage. The Voigtlander Ultron vintage line 28mm f2, a spherical type 2 lens. Talk about a mouthful. But this is the brand new lens, you guys, and I'm honestly super excited for it. Now, I've been wanting to shoot a 28mm focal length on my M mount cameras roughly for the last 2 years, ever since I got introduced to the Ricoh GR. I fell in love with the 28mm focal length, and I wanted that on my Leica cameras. Now, the only thing that really held me back was none of my M mount cameras had the frame lines to accommodate a 28mm lens. All right, so these are my M mount cameras, the Leica M2, as well as the Voigtlander Bessa R2A. Now, neither of these cameras had the 28mm focal length, and so for a really long time, I kind of just put this idea off, just knowing that I wouldn't be able to frame properly. Now, it wasn't until I was watching one of my favorite street photographers, Gary Winogrand, here on YouTube, make photographs. I think he was in like LA, and he has a Leica M4. And the M4 at that time didn't have 28mm frame lines either. And so what he had, though, was on his hot shoe, or should say cold shoe mount, he had an external viewfinder. And so that kind of forced me to bite the bullet and just say, you know what, regardless of, not having any of the frame lines, I can always throw an external viewfinder on here and get away with it. So that's what I did. I ended up choosing the Voigtlander 28mm Ultron version 2 because I read a ton of good things online, and also it was a budget-friendly lens opposed to like the Summicrons and whatnot. Okay, so now I'm gonna take you guys through my setup of this lens. Now, I'll be honest with you, I doubt that I'm going to shoot the Ultron on my M2 up until I get a proper external viewfinder, maybe like the Voigtlander Brightline 28mm finder, just because of the viewfinder magnification. Because I figured out online that if you use the internal viewfinder of the R2A, which has a 0.7 magnification viewfinder, the entire frame, disregarding the frame lens completely, is roughly equivalent to the 28mm focal length. Now, with that said, the M2 has a 0.72 magnification viewfinder, and so it's a little bit more narrow. And so with the R2A, it's just that slight bit wider that gives it a more kind of natural look and feel, in my opinion. And it just looks a little bit more accurate. So here is the camera setup itself. As you guys can see, here is the lens here up at the front. Very, very beautiful lens. It's so shiny. I haven't had a new Leica lens, and I think this is the first new Leica lens I've had in about 3 years. Aperture ring is up at the front, nice and clicky with half stops in between. Listen to that sound here. The focus ring is super smooth, and the throw is surprisingly short. It's not the shortest. My Summicron definitely has a shorter focus throw, but that's because this lens has a minimum focus distance of 0.5 meters, which is 0.2 meters shorter than what my camera is focused to. The M2 and the R2A both focus to 0.7 meters. Now, a couple of things that I really appreciate about this lens is the aperture markings here at the top. The depth of field scale right here on the top, I don't know if you guys can see that, goes over just the base part here. So when you're looking at your camera, a lot of times, when you're reading that depth of field scale, you'll only have markings up here on that front base plate. But Voigtlander went ahead and just painted over so it extends onto the very top, because a lot of the times when you're out and about and you're zone focusing, you're not always looking at your camera straight on. sometimes you're doing this. And so that allows you to kind of have a better understanding of where your focus is going to be set. Now on the top, on the hyperfocal scale, you have your distances in feet in red and then in meters in white. And the focus ring is super smooth. And there's a certain resistance that I love about this lens. It's not as loose as like my Summicron, which it's not the loosest thing in the world, but it's not the tightest thing. Okay. Now zone focusing with this lens is honestly going to be a breeze. You know, with that added detail from Voigtlander, it's going to allow me to adjust my focus distance on the fly super quickly. But one thing that I really want to mention is that they fixed the actual focusing tab on the lens. So for the first version, there was a little kind of nub. And personally, I'm not a huge fan of that just because you can kind of slip focus. But with this new focus tab, it's similar to what you have on the Summicron. There's kind of like two peaks and then a little valley to where you can set your finger in and focus comfortably. So this is my preferred kind of, you know, focus tab, and it makes focusing really quick and really easy. You don't have to kind of search for the tab. You know, you feel for it and here it is. All right, so in terms of image quality, obviously I haven't been able to shoot with it. I literally just unboxed this 5 minutes ago, but I've never really been disappointed from Voigtlander lenses. In the past, I've had the 35mm color scope bar 2.5, and that lens was really good for its price. It was $300 to $400. And it was the lens that I used to photograph all of Crosswalk, one of my street photography projects. And I really had no complaints in terms of image quality with that lens. So I'm guessing that the Ultron, and just seeing images that I've seen online, is going to follow in that trend. And not to mention it's a spherical, and so I'm pretty sure, I hope, that this lens is going to be really sharp. I will be posting up results from an upcoming Utah trip that I will be, you know, going on next week with this lens, and so you guys will be able to see for yourself. I did add an external viewfinder here on the top, and the external viewfinder is just, you know, kind of plastic, fantastic thing. You can find these online for $10 to $20. There's no frame lines built in, and this is just gonna have to do until I pick up a proper bright line viewfinder from Voigtlander. With that said, you know, there's no frame lines again. It just gives you kind of like a field of view of a 28mm focal length. It sits here up on the cold shoe conveniently. But honestly, you guys, I think I'm just going to use the viewfinder inside of the Bessa. It's a little bit more clear. I can still use my rangefinder patch to focus. And the Bessa R2A has the ability to select the frame lines that you want displayed. And so rather than having the 35mm frame line on here, I choose to go for the 75 because it shrinks down, you know, those frame lines, and so you get a better view of the entire field inside of that viewfinder, which allows you to frame just a little bit more accurately. But there you go, you guys. That is my new kind of like a setup, my new lens, the Voigtlander 28mm Ultron version 2, a spherical lens. So thank you guys, man, for tuning into this episode. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, or even just any advice on this lens that you guys can give me, leave those in the comment section down below. I really want to find a lens hood, and I don't even know what lens hood this lens takes. And so if you guys have that information, drop that down below so that I can potentially get one. I'll see you in the next one. As always, Minolta gang.